What do you expect to be the most important issues facing the city during the next 2 years? You're being elected for another 2-year term.
That's right. Well, there's one issue that's been brewing. People have maybe heard a little bit about it, but it's our city retirement plan for city workers. The funding of that pension system is going to be, well, it is already, but it's going to continue to be, I think, one of the struggles that we have. Because even though the municipal tax rate hasn't increased under the Bob Kiss administration, there are other things that are driving property taxes up, and this, unfortunately, is one of them. And it's due to both the downturn in the economy in the early 2000s and again now, and basically the performance of our investments for the pension fund not performing as well. Another complicating factor is some of the investment choices were not the smartest choices. But on top of that, the funding hasn't been, we haven't been putting in as much funding to make it a fully funded pension system. So I sat on the mayor's retirement task force a couple years ago before I was on the city council as a citizen to really look at making recommendations of how can we shore up the system and make some recommendations to the council to start to fix this problem, this looming problem, so that the city taxpayers didn't face, a substantial increase in property taxes just to fund this specific part of city government. So the things that are important to me in that, as we try to continue to kind of sort through that problem, is that we don't fall into the trap of thinking that defined contribution programs instead of a defined benefit program is the way to go. People who have those types of programs, or more like 401k programs, certainly saw the real downside of that when the economy tanked in the last year to 18 months. And I think that shows that while it might be helpful as a secondary retirement system, if you have a defined benefit, to have another option for something like that, like for a contribution either by the employee or another contribution by the employer, it's not a smart way to have everyone's pensions in just solely a defined contribution system, because you lose a lot just by the way that the stock market and investment world goes up and down all the time. But a defined benefit, I feel like, is a more stable program. Defined benefit enables an employee to know what their benefit would be upon retirement, both a predictable pension amount, but there's usually a health insurance benefit that's tied to that. And so I want to see Burlington to continue to offer that to city workers, not only because that's a better plan, but because everyone we've hired on so far has been given that as a promise to say, as part of coming to Burlington and being a public worker here, you're going to get that upon retirement. So to change any element of that midstream while people are already, without really being thoughtful about the impacts of that, I think is an irresponsible decision. But there's other things that we're trying to, the city is trying to change up on the pension system now through the collective bargaining process with our bargaining units. Everybody's bargaining right now in the city government, and there's certainly some changes we're trying to make to the retirement system to ask the unions to give back on, contribution levels or increase their contribution levels and other pieces in a generic way, in return for other things that we can give them, just so that we're, again, tightening up the pension system. But it's really complex, and if people have questions, they can certainly be in touch. But I do think that's a major challenge for the city in the next 2 years, just to make sure that doesn't push taxes out of whack. And I think the second issue, it might seem like the chronic issue, but housing is hands down an issue that we still have not completely, and we may never completely solve, but that continues to, I think, be one of the top issues facing Burlington. And I think that's just a given because of the relationship with having higher ed institutions, two large ones within Burlington. It puts pressure on our housing market for community members to have so many students living in the community. So I think Burlington needs to continue to be innovative. We've done a lot of great housing efforts to make housing affordable in many regards through the Champlain Housing Trust, but we have a lot more we need to do because students still put pressure on rental rates and kind of also compete for the available apartment housing that is available. So I think those two issues, pension and housing, are the things that really are going to face Burlington in the next 2 years.
Those two issues are probably issues statewide. In Barrie, I'm sure they have a pension program, and they're probably concerned about that too. Mm-hmm. And in Montpelier, there's a university So students probably have an influence on housing there too. I wanted to point out that you grew up in Barre and that these issues are statewide because some of the public access, this program is statewide also, and some of the other public access stations were concerned last year that, well, we're covering the Burlington elections, and they didn't want to play the show. So I think they should realize that really the issues we talk about are progressive party issues that concern all of Vermont.
Absolutely. You know, in Barre's done some innovative things through their local, either it's the Land Trust or through their whatever their equivalent of Champlain Valley Housing Trust is. But I know that, for example, my parents were trying to get me to come back to Barre because there was a real deal that you can get a significant help on your down payment for buying houses in Barre because they're trying to draw more people into to live in Barre and buy houses there. It's much more affordable than trying to buy something in Montpelier. But that doesn't mean that that working people can still afford those prices. So it is absolutely an issue that faces, I think, communities throughout Vermont, the affordable housing crunch. Because if you go to other towns that have more pressure because of second home owners, so Stowe and Ludlow and other places where there are ski areas, they have a whole other scenario. So while it may not be students, it's another group of people who have either other resources or for other reasons put pressure on the housing market for the average Vermonter who's just trying to, be able to afford a house and make a living and stay in Vermont. So absolutely, and now it's good to know that this is a statewide program because so much of probably what we're going to continue to talk about is applicable everywhere in the state. People really need to face working people. It's an issue all throughout Vermont.
I'm on the state committee of the Progressive Party. We had a state committee meeting just last Sunday, and we have representatives all around the state, but Burlington, I think, is the center of progressive politics at the moment. But it would be nice if we could expand and get stronger in other communities, other parts of the state. Last year, the economic crisis was on everyone's mind, and in spite of the stimulus packages from Washington, the Douglas administration has cut important programs in the state budget. How have these cuts affected Burlington? Have we been able to compensate for these cuts in the city budget, or have important city programs been cut also? Well,
the thing about Burlington is, I think, due to a lot of innovative programs that the progressive administrations over the years have done, Burlington has been able to weather the economic downturn much better than a lot of other Vermont communities. So there's these different worlds. There are state services and then there's city services. And I think certainly going through the budget process last year in 2009, my first one, while I was on the council, we weren't having to face as draconian cuts as, say, the state government was. And I think, again, that's because we were being very mindful in years coming up to make Burlington self-sufficient and sustainable in many ways with the choices we were making. So, for example, by really looking at the budget 4 or so years ago when we brought on a new administration and really looking at how can we do cost savings to make sure that the municipal tax rate is not going up in an unsustainable way, and being sensitive to income levels of everyone in Burlington and being smart about that, I think that's made us develop a budget that is workable. And then, other innovative things of trying to support startup businesses helps the local economy chug right along. And so, our work with Dealer.com on Pine Street to bring in those 300 or so jobs, that was something in the last few years, and other small business startups, that continues to help to strengthen our local economy here. But if you go to the larger state level, certainly that's not the case in every community. And on the state level, when you have an economic downturn, it's unfortunate when you have a governor who, instead of saying, well, if people are losing their jobs and losing resources and maybe losing, all sorts of other avenues for, keeping their families and their lives going, and the reaction to that is to cut services. To me, that will further and has further continue us into this downward spiral, simply because people who are in need those state services. So it's kind of like removing the safety net when people need it most. So while I don't think we've felt that as dramatically here in Burlington, there are reasons why, but certainly on a statewide level, these services it's not like Burlington has been able to pick up the cuts in some of, if you look through everything from the Department of Ed to Department of Health, all of those services, even if they are for Burlington residents, certainly Burlington residents are feeling those cuts. That's not something the city can either afford nor should have to step in and replace for the state. Really, I think we need better lawmakers, frankly, on the state level who are responsive to working people and not using this as an opportunity to shrink government or to further cut services that are absolutely needed in this particular moment.